Listen. Hi, and welcome to Yeti at Large. This is a channel focused on making the most out of what you have, no matter where you're at. Thanks for tuning in and helping out. Today we're going to pay tribute to one of my favorite YouTube channels, John Kirkwood, by making his no-knead baguettes. Instantly you'll see I'm using the wrong flour, all-purpose. I should be using a high-protein or a high-gluten flour, but this is great flour. I'm weighing out the 25 ounces on the even arm balance scale. We have more videos on that. You'll see it's warm in my house with a high temperature, so I take that into account. 1 teaspoon of salt, 1 1/2 teaspoon of SAF instant yeast. The water for the recipe is at about 72 degrees Fahrenheit, and this is good filtered water. Touch warm for French-style bread, but we'll be real careful and respect that as we mix along. Now I've zeroed out the scale so that the Pyrex glass doesn't weigh anything, and I'm going to weigh it out by adding 32 ounces, taking away 16, plus 2.5 to get me my 18.5 ounces. I suspect the humidity where I live and at 7,000 feet altitude is much drier than where John lives. So my flour doesn't have the humidity in it that his will. You'll see later in the recipe I add about 1.5 ounces of water. So the next time I make this, I'll probably use 20 ounces right out of the gate. There's my dry ingredients and the handle of the spoon that John's talking about. Wished it didn't have a hole in it, but we'll clean that up. Mix those dry ingredients so that the salt doesn't burn the yeast before you get the dough fully formed. It's important to get a good lively dough. Make a small well in the middle, bang the edge to get the dry stuff to fall back down. And I went ahead and added all the water blindly, trusting John's recipe. I love making other people's recipes. It's always an adventure. Over my 25 years working as a pastry chef and a commercial baker, I must have made 100,000 pounds of bread, but it never gets boring and it never gets old. So just using the handle of the spoon like John teaches, I'm going to mix this up until it is, and I quote, a shaggy lump. It's part of the secret of this recipe, and it's something I really hope that you have the courage to try. Let's say you go visit at a friend's house for a weekend and you're going to be there and you're going to make something for dinner with just a bowl and a spoon, flour, yeast, and salt and water. You can make the most amazing bread, and it would be a great accompaniment to any party or group dinner. There's that dry spot of the dough I was feeling, so I added that 1.5 ounces of water right there. These high hydration doughs, they're very sticky and they can be very tough to work with, but very rewarding with the product that you get at the end. Now, I'm going to fast forward a lot of sections in the interest of brevity, and I strongly recommend you go to John Kirkwood's channel and watch his entire videos on bread. But for this point, you're going to see where we're going to make it into that shaggy lump that he talks about. I'll use my bowl scraper and scrape down the edges of the bowl and the spoon, and I'll cover it with the little commercial plastic wrap. So here we are at the end of our first 45-minute rest. There'll be 4 total rests of 45 minutes each. By covering the dough, set a timer. You can go do other things. Gently fold the dough. You'll see John on his channel take it out and put it on the bench and do it in the bowl. I did all 4 of my folds in the bowl, and I'm being very careful not to overwork the dough at this point because you'll lose that nice crispy baguette texture. You can see the dough is already coming along and getting some strength in it. But I'll just gently fold it over with that wet scraper back into a bowl, cover it back up with the same plastic wrap, and we'll repeat this for a total of 4 times. I believe this is the second one where we start to see that we've got a really good rise happening, and the behavior of the dough is already starting to look a lot like a French or Italian style bread. So again, very gently just lift and fold. Lift and fold. I could probably actually stop at 4 But some old habits die hard, and I continued on to 8 sets of folds. I do like this part, though, where it proves that John's recipe and his method allow you to make a mistake, i.e. using all-purpose flour, not a very strong flour, and you still come out with a very respectable product. Next time I make this, I'll probably add a full tablespoon of vital wheat gluten to that same flour and get a much more strength in the dough. So here we are. You can see I'm getting good rising action because the bubbles are snapping and popping there, and you can see them clearly. It's still a very high hydration dough, so you've got to be careful. It's very sticky. I'm going to flip it over and turn it over in the bowl just to get it, and always looking at the dough. I found something I didn't like in there, so I picked it out. Here we are on our third. I'm going to skip over the fourth one in a minute, but the third one is where I really noticed. I put those divots in there to see if it springs back, and it didn't, but look at how the size of the dough ball has more than doubled. So again, I'll just pick it up, fold it on itself gently, being careful not to overwork it, and I'm noticing I'm getting a lot of good springy action and a good strong dough. Getting pretty excited at this point. So we skipped over the fourth one for brevity's sake, and I'm going to turn it out onto the bench. Here's where I'm going to stop using water and use a little flour. I'll be careful not to add any more than I have to, but I want to round this up in a ball shape and knock out any big air bubbles so that it doesn't skew my portioning. Normally in a commercial bakery, we'll use that even arm balance scale and portion them out perfectly, but here I'm just going to eyeball 4 different baguettes and go that route, kind of how John did on his video. We're going to do what we call preforming at this point, and I kind of rounded them into balls, and then I'm going to make my oval baguette shapes ahead of time, being careful again not to overwork or overhandle the dough. And at this point, I'll sit and let them rest about 15 minutes. Now you see that one was a little heavy, so I took a little nibble off the dough and I divided it between the 2 of the lighter ones to even them out a bit. Remember, I showed you that thermostat. My place is real warm with the wood stove going, so the rise times are going to be a little bit shorter. If your place is cool, don't be surprised if it takes a couple of minutes for them to fully relax and double in size. So I'm recycling that same plastic wrap just to cover them up to prevent them from getting a sticky dough. Now they've doubled and rested here. It was about 15 minutes for me using my bench scraper. I'm going to press these into a basic rectangle shape, shake off any extra flour they may have, and then a lift and a pinch. I'm not trying to roll them out at this point. I'm just lifting and pinching them to create a good tight seam. And you'll see by doing that, I've got half of my baguette already done. You want to get that good seam. I use my fingertips. Other people will use the heel of their hand. You can see that it's sticking hard to the bench, so I'll use just a touch of flour to keep it from sticking. Now the important thing is when rolling these out, you're not trying to stretch them apart from each other. You're just pressing straight down and feeling the dough escape out from underneath your hands. You don't want to tear or rip the dough at this point. You just want to encourage it into the baguette shape. Fast forward to make the rest of our baguettes. I'm not going to make long ones. I'm going to make shorter ones. And you'll see in my sheet pan in a minute, I've only got half-size sheet pans. That's semolina flour on the bottom. I don't like the way flour feels on the tongue with finished bread. You can also use cornmeal. But there are my 4 baguettes, fully formed up and ready to go. This is about a 30-minute rest I'm going to give them here to rise, and I'm going to recycle that plastic wrap one more time, being careful not to let it stick to the dough. Again, your rise times may differ. As we get towards the end of that rise, I'll put my Emerald Lagasse cast iron skillet in the bottom of the oven there. I'll turn it on to 440, and I'll break out a good razor. I don't have a bread razor, but I got these box cutters. And I will, as gently as possible, score those at about a 45-degree angle. There's my dog. I was waiting for her to speak up in the middle of this. But be very careful not to overhandle them while you're scoring them. You can knock a lot of the rise out of them. I'm not being as gentle as most people probably should be, but I've done so much bread, I kind of feel like I got a touch for it. And again, these cuts are to allow the bread to jump in the hot oven without tearing on the sides. Plus, they're quite decorative. So, a couple minutes later, you can see the bread's rising quite quickly now. I know that my oven's up to temperature. I've got a container of very hot water, and I'm about to put these in a 440 degree Fahrenheit oven. You see the jiggle, they're fully risen. You can see how fast the cuts are opening up. Now I'll put them in there, and I'll pour that hot water into that hot pan to get a good burst of steam, and I'll close that door. Be very careful, that steam is dangerous. Worst burn you'll ever get. 21 minutes later, at my altitude with my oven, I felt like I got real good browning and a real good crisp all the way down the sides of the bread. I call it the hips. I'm seeing some of the shortcomings of the all-purpose flour at this point because I don't have quite the structure that I was looking for. But that's the beauty of baking. You kind of learn as you go. That third one is my personal favorite. John Kirkwood, I enjoy your channel. You are a darn good cook and a good baker. And in my world, there's no greater compliment. Listen. Sue me now. A little fresh butter and a taste test. These are delicious, John. Thanks for the recipe.